Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Tonight, a special edition of the program helping kick off WTTW's new First Hand initiative focusing this year on poverty. On the show tonight,
the FBI is part of it, the Secret Service is part of it.
We look at the security in place for the presidential inauguration on Wednesday, including vetting members of the military.
It can be a cascade of events.
Unemployment has hit record highs during the pandemic. As we help launch WTTW's First Hand initiative focusing on poverty, we explore the link between unemployment and poverty.
Our rent was too much. I ain't found a job in Chicago, so it was just hard.
How the state, county, and city are responding to a poverty pandemic that predates COVID-19 and that is driving some people out of Illinois.
You need help sometimes.
Cash assistance, no questions asked. What are basic income payments, and why do some advocates say they can help families in poverty reach their financial goals?
A look at suburban poverty, which has skyrocketed in recent years. We talk with a group working on that issue and someone who's experiencing it firsthand.
And it's been 55 years since Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. arrived in Chicago's North Lawndale community, revisiting the work King did to end slum conditions and combat discriminatory housing practices. But first, some of today's top stories. In commemoration of the 26th anniversary of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service, volunteers dedicated the Martin Luther King Jr. Bridge that crosses the Bishop Ford Expressway in the Rosemore neighborhood.
This was a revolution started by this man, and we honor him today in his full legacy as a man of a full revolution. And that's why we have y'all here today. Y'all didn't just stay at home, take that easy vacation day. You guys came out today as a legacy of that radical action.
Volunteers from My Block, My Hood, My City and the Rosemore Community Association dedicated the bridge with a plaque and distributed personal protective equipment to more than 2,000 senior citizens. Volunteers also decorated the bridge with red roses in honor of Reverend King. Illinois public health officials announced nearly 3,400 new cases of the coronavirus and 50 additional deaths today. The state's total number of cases stands just over 1,072,000 with 18,258 deaths. The state's positivity rate is 7%. And this weekend, Chicago lost a pioneer and a member of the WTTW family. Jim Tilmon wore many hats: pilot, broadcaster, musician, author, and trailblazer. Here he is with Phil Ponce back in 2017 discussing the start of his broadcasting career right here at WTTW.
Our people, because you started your broadcast career here on Chicago, here on WTTW. Real quickly, what was Our People?
Our People was an expression of voice. It gave visibility and voice for people who had none. It gave us an opportunity to do our stories, not just the ones on broadcast television, stories that were germane to us and stories that were meaningful to us and people that were meaningful to us and subject matter and everything else. It was an outlet that needed to be, it had to be right then.
My own thanks to Jim Tilmon for blazing that trail. At the time, he was discussing his new book, I Just Wanted to Fly, about his careers in the military and as one of the first black commercial airline pilots. Tilmon went on to become the host of Our People here at WTTW and later weatherman and broadcaster at other stations in Chicago. He died at his home in Scottsdale, Arizona this weekend at the age of 86. And we'll have more of Phil's 2017 conversation with Jim Tilmon on tomorrow night's program. And now to Paris with a preview of security plans in place for Wednesday's inauguration. Paris.
Brandis, barricades, security checkpoints, and a huge military presence are surrounding the U.S. Capitol ahead of Wednesday's inauguration. The swearing in of a new president always comes with heightened security, but this ceremony comes 2 weeks after the Capitol building was breached. And to some, the lockdown right now is a jarring sight.
We don't want to see fences. We definitely don't want to see armed troops on our streets, but we do have to take a different posture.
We are part of the layered defense to ensure that the bubble that will be around the vice president-elect and the president-elect so that we can have a peaceful transfer of power.
And joining us to talk about inaugural security are Javed Ali, Towsley policymaker in residence at the University of Michigan's Ford School, and he previously worked for the National Security Council and Department of Homeland Security, among others, and Ross Rice, a former FBI special agent who spent 30 years in the Bureau's Chicago office. Gentlemen, welcome to Chicago tonight.
Thank you.
Ross, inaugurations are always massive national security events. They're fortified, but this year, extra layers with up to 25,000 National Guard troops. Are you confident that this will be carried out safely?
Well, I don't like to try and predict the future, but I think every step has been taken to ensure a smooth transition of power. I know a lot of people are concerned about the inauguration, given what happened 2 weeks ago in the Capitol. I think, quite frankly, at least from my perspective, the two events are completely unrelated. Great steps have been taken to secure the inauguration ceremony. It's considered a national special security event, and it's been in the planning process for months, if not longer. The Secret Service and the FBI take the lead on that. The Secret Service for actual physical security, and the FBI for threat assessments and investigating any incidents that might take place during, before, or after the inauguration.
Javed Ali, does it act as a deterrent to possible extremist groups or militias when you have a situation that's that fortified? I mean, does it just tell them to stay away?
Yeah, Paris, great question. Certainly, one would think that with that many resources on the ground in Washington, D.C., looking at the 25,000 National Guard troops, the heavy presence of federal law enforcement like the FBI and Secret Service, as Ross has mentioned, and other state and local government resources. There will be rings and rings of security and then hard security features all over Washington, D.C. But that doesn't mean that there is absolutely zero risk of a threat. Hopefully there won't be. But as we used to say in counterterrorism, the enemy always gets a vote. So even if Washington, D.C. is significantly protected, and certainly it seems to be, as the FBI bulletin from almost now a week ago suggested, there was the potential for threats across the entire country, or at least at state houses or other public buildings. So that's another feature of this threat. It is not going to dissipate after the inauguration. It is here to stay. I think it's already a permanent feature of the domestic security landscape. And this is something that my former colleagues and Ross's former colleagues, they're going to have to struggle with for a long time, because I just don't think we have still the right paradigm to deal with this kind of security threat.
Ross Rice, do you agree with that? I mean, this is here to stay well beyond the inauguration, perhaps a permanent insurrectionist movement where there will be targets on government buildings, either state capitol or at the U.S. Capitol.
Well, we've had what we call domestic terrorism for decades. It's not new. What has changed is the motivation of the terrorist. It's a very small fraction of the population, very vocal. Is it going to be in the forefront for a while? Yes, I think so. Is it long-term a threat to national security or the stability of the government? I don't think so. I think people are upset for a variety of reasons, and cooler heads eventually will prevail, I think.
Javed Ali, the Defense Department last night told the AP that they're concerned about possible inside attacks where there might be sympathizers in the National Guard that are tasked with guarding this ceremony on Wednesday. And there are documented instances of perhaps extremism filtering into the armed services. How big a threat do you think that is?
That's certainly a threat, and there have been a number of cases of individuals with either active duty status or former military service who have been caught up in these far-right beliefs and ideas, and some even in 2020. There were several actually disrupted plots with people with those backgrounds. And then there was one lethal attack, tragically, last summer, where an active duty Air Force sergeant, self-professed member or supporter of the Boogaloo movement, shot and killed 2 law enforcement officers in California. So it's real. But I think what occurred over the last 24, 48 hours, that seemed less based on sort of the notion of an active, credible threat from any of the Guard troops deployed on the ground. I think it was just another prudent screening measure that went into effect to just make sure you're trying to minimize risk. And for folks like Ross and myself, we used to get scream like that all the time. So I don't think it's that unusual to have that kind of check happen. It may seem a little jarring so close to the inauguration, but I'm not as concerned as others on that particular piece.
So more of a pro forma announcement there. Ross Rice, you know, a lot of critics of the response to January 6th say that there was just a failure on multiple fronts, either by intelligence or sharing intelligence or adequately fortifying the Capitol in the wake of known threats. Do you agree with some of those assessments?
Well, something went wrong, and to sit here and try and second guess and say what that was, it would be irresponsible of me to do. There's going to be an investigation. What people have to realize is the Capitol, the building, the grounds, is an entity unto itself. It's under the jurisdiction of the members of Congress, and in particular, the Speaker. That's why they have the Capitol Police there. That's their job, is to protect the building and the members of Congress. They either didn't take the threat seriously, or they didn't have the resources that they thought they had to protect the building and protect the grounds. What intelligence was given to them and when, I'm not sure. But if you look at the video, you look at the images from that day, many of the people that were there, they came prepared. You know, they didn't go to a rally and get motivated by the president and then run home and get helmets and ballistic armor and makeshift weapons. They came to Washington prepared to do battle of some sort.
It certainly seems to indicate. Javad Ali, we only have a few seconds left, but you know, you've written a column talking about the weaponization of patriotic language, folks calling themselves patriots in the service of going out and committing violent acts. So what should Americans know about this movement and how folks have been radicalized?
Yeah, this seems to be a disturbing feature of what's going on, or what's been going on the last year. And this notion now that people will claim to be patriots and wrap themselves around the flag or terms that seem, you know, ordinary to most Americans, and then use that to justify violent action against the government or other perceived enemies. That is something very disturbing. I don't think we've seen that in modern history, and this is another piece of the puzzle that's going to have to be examined as we go.
We're going to have to monitor all these things. We hope to have you both back, but for now, our thanks to Javad Ali and Ross Rice. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
And up next, special coverage of poverty as WTTW kicks off its year-long Firsthand Living in Poverty initiative. So please stick around.
What can you tell us about how Chicago small businesses are doing? These are more than just shopping centers for the community. They're gathering places where they maintain their culture.
As we mentioned at the top of the program, WTTW's Firsthand Living in Poverty, a year-long initiative, launches today on MLK Day and during Poverty Awareness Month. You can explore the documentaries, expert talks, and related content at WTTW.com/poverty. Long before the coronavirus pandemic, communities of color across Illinois and in the city were experiencing an epidemic of poverty. A 2020 state report finds that as of 2018, 1 in 8 Illinoisans were living in poverty. For a family of 3, that was defined as having an annual income of just over $20,000. Black women in Illinois were 3 times more likely to experience poverty than white men, and 1 in 3 black children lived below the poverty line. And that was before the pandemic created a perfect storm of need as COVID-19 hit black and brown communities the hardest. Joining us are Sochi Flores, Bureau Chief for Economic Development for Cook County, Candace Moore, the City of Chicago's very first Chief Equity Officer, a position created under Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and Sol Flores, one of Illinois' deputy governors. Thanks to all 3 of you for joining us. Deputy Governor Sol Flores, let's start with you, please. At $20,000 for a family of 3, are we defining poverty accurately? Surely a family of 3 at $30,000 or even $40,000 is likely struggling.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly right. And they're struggling on multiple fronts. How to pay rent, make sure they're living in a stable house, how to ensure that their food secure, that they have enough food to eat when they need to eat, making sure that they have access to transportation, to healthcare, to school supplies. Oh, and once in a while, you have to also buy new clothes. I think you're exactly right. It's well below what most individuals can live on in this country, even when you're struggling day to day.
How would you, Deputy Governor, how would you describe the level of need before the pandemic, and how it is now, nearly 11 months into it?
Well, at the intro, you talked about 1 in 8 Illinoisans, right? We also know it's about 1 in 6 children. The other thing that we know is that poverty in the state of Illinois has not significantly increased, or decreased rather, in the last 30 years. So what we've been doing incrementally has not been working. We also know that social mobility has significantly decreased. So we know that our children are doing worse off than their parents before them, right? Which is the reverse, which is exactly what we don't want to have happen. We know that there is a significant amount of work to do. The pandemic, as you also said, has ripped the Band-Aid off and made glaringly clear what poor people in this state were already dealing with. And now we have even more people dealing with it. And unfortunately, it continues to shine a light on people of color, Black, Latino, and immigrant communities. Rural communities continue to struggle prior to the pandemic, and even more so now.
And Xochitl Flores, what are the most acute needs that you would say you're seeing? Is it a matter of housing or food insecurity, mental health?
Well, across the board, we're seeing the needs just exacerbated during this time. I mean, we saw in the US, over 8 million Americans are slipping into poverty since May. And this pandemic is exposing how easy it is to fall from the middle class into poverty. And people just really need to depend on their government right now and ask us to function swiftly and efficiently to strengthen these vital networks of support. I mean, we're seeing it across the board, from housing, from individuals having food insecurity, from children not even having laptops to work and study remotely. So it's across the board. And specifically within Cook County, we have focused primarily on our suburban areas of the county. So our distribution of funding goes to the 2.5 million residents and the 130 municipalities of our suburban Cook County areas.
Candace Moore, of course, we know that systemic racism means that Black and brown communities are disproportionately impacted by poverty. But of course, we also know those same communities have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. From the city's perspective, what can you do? What are you doing to help remedy those inequities?
Yeah, I think at a city and really across government, it's important to actually center that as a truth of the problem that we are dealing with. And then think about, as we are thinking about the solutions, how do we focus on the targeted communities that we really need to hit? And that isn't to the exception of other communities, but that's ensuring that our strategies and our focus is going to move the needle for that community. So that means thinking about neighborhoods, thinking about how we make available access to our services. Is this first come versus is there actually a period of time in which we can do the appropriate outreach to let people know about the services and the resources that are out there. So really sort of pushing ourselves, stretching our muscles in how we do deliver our resources with that eye towards equity really in mind.
Now, in our Firsthand Poverty series, Dominatrius Chambers helps us address the cost of housing. She was an excellent high school student, but has been struggling to earn a college degree and to find a job as well as affordable housing. Here's something that she told us.
Today is the day that I moved to Indiana. I was looking for apartments in Chicago. The stuff was hard. Rent was too much. I ain't found a job in Chicago, so it was just hard. Then a miracle happened, and my brother happened to have an apartment in South Bend, Indiana.
Candace Moore, what do you say to someone who finds that they have to leave the city in order to make a way for themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us here at the city, that increases the demand on us to think about solutions around affordable housing, around jobs, to make sure that we recognize that the circumstances that are presenting right now are forcing people to make these really tough decisions. I'm noting how in this case this person is thinking about where their family is and how people are pulling together to make ends meet. This is the same situations that we're dealing with inside of the city, and we have to think about on a systemic level, what does affordable housing look like, even under the constraints that we are under. And so that has been really top of mind. I know there's been a ton of focus on affordable housing at the city, but also thinking about all of our the urgency of the moment and the resources that we can deliver as a city.
Xochitl Flores, we know that the burden of property taxes has fallen on disproportionately poorer homeowners, and that lenders have historically not provided loans to Black and brown communities as much as they do in white communities. How do you address the kinds of inequities that have been decades in the making?
Well, you are correct in terms of the decades in the making, and specifically over the last 20 years, we've seen across the U.S., there has been an increase in suburbanization of poverty. So individuals such as the one that just shared her story, we see that happening across suburban Cook County. People are moving towards these areas, and the difficulty, not just with the property taxes, but across the board, accessing social services within many of these communities, it's very difficult for individuals because these communities have not built out the support systems needed by this growing low-income population. So they have a weaker support safety net within these areas. So that's an area that we have been extremely focused on, figuring out how to address these safety nets that need to be provided within our suburban Cook counties.
And Deputy Governor Flores, I'm going to give you the last word because we've got about 30 seconds left. Governor Pritzker has repeatedly called on the federal government for more assistance. I believe the mayor has said the same. What kind of support are you expecting from a Biden administration?
We're expecting a lot of support. First and foremost, attacking the pandemic, right? And that means delivering additional vaccine as quickly as possible. It means sending federal resources to Illinois to help us develop and execute on mass vaccination sites. It means increasing testing opportunities. And of course, it means additional aid for local jurisdictions and states to recover from some of our lost revenue sources, along with additional, just like we had before, CARES funding support for rental assistance, food security, and healthcare services.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. My thanks to Deputy Governor Xochitl Flores from Cook County and Candace Moore from the city of Chicago. And now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Brandis. Now we take a look at a clip from one of the new Firsthand Living in Poverty documentaries. This part follows Roseland resident Patricia Jackson and her husband Derek. They're working to get a delivery business off the ground with the help of basic income payments from an organization called the Family Independence Initiative, or FII. Let's take a look.
The tree was here, and when the tree fell, it fell all the way. I had a big tree, and it fell this way.
When the tree fell, it broke all of this. It broke into pieces.
And then it knocked this whole garage out. That meant that now I have to decide whether I'm going to pay the whole light bill or partial, or get on a partial plan. Now I got to get on a plan because I don't have the money for emergency. See, I really never had emergency money. My daughter and I had got some money from FII, and we put it together and had him start on the fence.
FII stands for Family Independence Initiative. They give you a certain amount of funds to use towards your goals.
I gotta tell you about this here.
One of the things that my mom wants to get done is her kitchen.
What is what about the windows? Didn't you say something about the windows? I'm getting them.
She needed new floor, new cabinets, sink, everything.
Home Depot, we're gonna get the double sink.
The funds that FI give out, you do not have to pay it back. It's like a gift.
And then we're gonna get the new stove.
FI money help with rent. FI money help bring me back up to date with my car notes, with the kids schooling.
And it's water's leaking, and we have.
You're gonna go through trials and tribulations while you live in this world, and you need help sometimes. And they was that organization that was like, we understand real life situations. They wanted to help people in our community that had goals, that it was hard or impossible to get along, you know, because of your credit or because of the color of your skin, or because of your income. You know, FII was like, we're not looking at any of that. We looking at a person that has a dream and a goal, and we just want to help you fulfill it.
What kind of stuff have you done with your FI fund?
Oh my God, I have done so much. Well, my 3 goals when we first started was to fix my credit, to work towards buying a house, and to work towards my husband's truck. He has his own business. He didn't have a work truck. He had to rent trucks, and he had to pay like $45 to $50 a day.
Yeah.
So it was just like wasted money.
And joining us with more on basic income payments are Harish Patel, Director of the group Economic Security for Illinois, Ebony Scott, Partnership Director at Family Independence Initiative, which you saw in that film, and Patricia Jackson, FII recipient and the first-hand documentary participant we just also saw in that clip. And as we start our conversation, let's show a clip from former presidential candidate Andrew Yang promoting the idea of a universal basic income. Here he is at the 2019 Democratic presidential debate.
My flagship proposal, the Freedom Dividend, would put $1,000 a month into the hands of every American adult, be a game changer for millions of American families.
All right, Harish Patel, there's different ideas here. You have the incoming President Joe Biden talking about a $1,400 direct cash payment. You have the idea of a universal basic income, and then in this case, a guaranteed income. What's the difference?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. You know, this idea of basic income, guaranteed income, cash has been around for a long time, as it is MLK Day today. There's a quote that's been flying around that came across my desk, which is him talking about, in 1967, him talking about a guaranteed income. So Andrew Yang, Mayor Tubbs, there's a lot more folks now talking about it as a perspective of how do you put cash into people's pockets? And there is probably a different perspective on how you get there. For me and for Economic Security for Illinois, what cash means is dignity, freedom, empowerment to do what you want with that money. Basic income covers ground that you know, anybody who qualifies can get it, whereas guaranteed income is a little bit more targeted towards, let's say, a geography or race or gender, and that ultimately is what the difference is.
And that's what Family Independence Initiative is doing, the guaranteed income targeted to a specific audience here. So tell us how FII works, Ebony Scott.
Sure. Thanks again, Paris, for having us. You know, FII really works in a very simple fashion. We go out and we try to find families who have goals and initiative, and like most Americans, are working diligently towards them. And so we make a direct cash investment in them. And then we also encourage them to tell us about the social capital that they're exchanging in their community, because that's part of what doesn't often get talked about, which is how people are helping people every single day in communities. And I think one of the things that sets FII apart is that, you know, when we meet families, we don't put them through the ringer and force them to prove that they are humble and worthy and deserving, right? You don't have to come to us and say, oh, I'm so downtrodden and I just want a little help, right? Like, that's not what we're doing. We recognize Patricia and her family as whole and capable and made an investment because she came to us already knowing what the path forward would look like. And so I think that's what makes FII a little bit different than a lot of the other supports that are out there for families.
Yeah, and you say in the documentary that this is based on the trust that you have, that families know what to do with income. They know how to make wise choices. And Patricia, in the clip, you know, we saw you talking about using this FII income to help your husband purchase a truck for his business. So how has that affected your husband's business and your overall family?
Mm-hmm. Hi, thanks for having me. It affected us in a positive way. Right now, my husband has his own truck. He can go as he please. You know, he can work 7 days a week if he wants, and all the profit is his. He don't have to pay somebody to rent their truck in order to work. So everything that he makes is all profit. So it makes a difference in, you know, having to rent something versus owning it yourself. And it's just a great difference. I mean, it's for the best. We're going in a positive direction.
So this is giving you a boost to do the things that you want in life. Harish, what would you say to the critics that say that the universal basic income or a guaranteed income could be a disincentive to work?
I would say to them to just look at data. There has been hundreds of years of research done internationally, nationally. 2 years ago, we ran a task force that compiled all this research in Chicago. And the task force has a report that people can look at. And the report sort of shows that is not true. Not only that, what is really sad is that most people actually are working multiple jobs. Most people are trying to make ends meet working gig economy jobs and 3 jobs. And for us, it would be helpful for people to have one job and make sure that those jobs actually pay.
And
Work doesn't pay right now.
And Ebony Scott, the FII, it's funded by philanthropic grants. It's $18 million, as I understand, for these guaranteed payments. So tell us the scope of the program and what you've seen from other families like Patricia's.
Sure. So here in Chicago, we're a national organization that's been around for about 20 years, but here in Chicago, we have about 500 families that have been enrolled into what we call our initiative. And the results across the board are really motivating and inspiring, right? We have lots of families like Patricia's. We have one gentleman who immediately upon joining invested the additional dollars back into his landscaping business because he was a single dad raising his kids and the children of a sibling who had passed away. And so, to build off what both Harish and Patricia said, we see our families go out and do more work as a result of the investment. And the notion that they're going to do the opposite is really rooted in mistrust and a lot of racist and classist things we think about the poor. We love to talk about how lazy poor folks are, but our data shows us that is the opposite. It is astounding to me every month to look at the data and to see how folks are starting side businesses, starting side hustles, using the money to go back to school while they work. They actually do more as soon as they have the additional cash to do so.
So it has a real stimulative impact. Patricia, you talked about breaking down barriers here, your husband being able to have his own truck and not have to pay those daily payments. What about other aspects of life, education, bills? Is this helping you with that?
Definitely. It definitely helped with education. I had a school loan. And with the help of FII and me paying through my job, I was able to pay off my student loan. So I no longer have a student loan. As far as like with bills, when my husband couldn't work for months when the pandemic first happened, we had some of those funds in a savings account. So it was, it went towards helping us. So it definitely helped give you a boost, and it definitely give you that step you need to go towards what in the right direction that you're trying to move towards.
That's a very interesting discussion, certainly an apropos time to talk about it. And congratulations on the documentary. And our thanks to Harish Patel, Ebony Scott, and Patricia Jackson. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight. Looking at a growing problem, poverty in the suburbs. We meet some of the cast in our first-hand documentary. And revisiting Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s work to end slum conditions and combat discriminatory housing practices. But first, we continue our special program helping launch WTTW's First-Hand Living in Poverty initiative with a look at a subject that has been at the forefront of the news for this past year. Unemployment, which hit record levels as businesses forced to shut down laid off workers. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda.
Brandis, Davita Hunt is a hairstylist in downstate Danville, and she remembers last March when the state shut down her salon because of COVID-19. Suddenly, through no fault of her own, she was without any income. She's self-employed, which means
we don't have an employer that pays into unemployment, so we had no options. We were literally told you're not going to be able to work, but we have no source of income, nothing to fall back on or anything like that. And initially, it was 2 weeks, but then it quickly turned into, oh, we're extending that and we're extending that.
she says it left her with a pit in her stomach. Eventually, some months later, she did get some money through the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. That is a particular federal program that is meant to help the self-employed and gig workers. But she says she still was left behind on her bills, even though thankfully she says she had her husband who kept his job. It left her worried for others.
I was thinking of like all the single moms who have kids that they had to support during it, and they had no source of income and still had every single bill coming in because nothing, bills didn't see the freeze in pay. You were still supposed to be paying those. And so I honestly don't know how a lot of people got through.
University of Chicago's Bruce Meyer co-authored a study that examined income, poverty, and the COVID-19 pandemic. The research showed what he describes as a dramatic increase in poverty in the latter half of 2020.
The largest increase was 1.4 percentage points over an entire year, and we saw a 2.3% increase over 5 months.
The impact, he says, is uneven across demographic groups. Blacks were disproportionately impacted, as were those without a higher education. He says the $600, now $300 COVID boost in unemployment benefits did help, but he says that while that makes a big difference for those who'd make less money to start with.
While more middle-class people who ended up losing their jobs, they had a smaller fraction of their lost earnings replaced.
As in, that pandemic bump doesn't go as far if you had been making more money to begin with. Jeremy Rosen, the director of economic justice at the Shriver Center on Poverty Law, says pre-pandemic unemployment rates were near record lows, around 3 or 4%. Now they've climbed steeply, with rates close to 10% for many Black and Latino households. Illinois is among the states with the highest number of unemployment claims in the nation.
And I think that's really a function of the fact that we have so many people in Chicago and the surrounding areas who work at exactly the type of low-wage jobs that have been most impacted during the pandemic.
He says, unfortunately, the government has not been equal to the task of responding. On the federal level, there was a huge lapse in time between the initial CARES Act and the COVID response that followed last month. And Illinois' Department of Employment Security is still overwhelmed.
Completely failed at its task of actually getting those benefits to people. So Congress and the federal government can authorize benefits for people, but if they can't actually apply for and receive those benefits successfully, it doesn't mean a whole lot for people if they're not getting the money that they're actually eligible for.
Losing a job is the sort of life event that can lead to a cascade of others, says Pat Rona, legal director at Carpel's Legal Aid.
That take one down into debt and poverty. Sometimes it's a one-time thing, but they never recover from. Sometimes employment has been a way out of poverty, and then to lose that job is sliding back into poverty. So unemployment benefits are a real bridge to get you to what we hope will be a brighter spot in the future.
One of the ways Carpel's is helping, meet Benny. He is a brand new chatbot.
Benny takes the user through a logic tree, a conversation, if you will, to find out where they're at in their unemployment journey. And along the way, gives them helpful tips, lets them know whether they're on the right path.
Carpel's has since developed other chatbots to help those on its COVID assistance website and to walk people who need it through things that are related, like foreclosure, debt, and eviction. Meanwhile, going forward, U of C's Bruce Meyer is still keeping an eye on poverty data. He is optimistic that with that latest stimulus, and also should any of President-elect Biden's plans go through, well, then he expects that we are going to see poverty rates decline. Brandis, back to you.
Sure, many people hope so, Amanda. Thank you. And now, Paris, back to you.
All right, Brandis, thanks. And now we look at another clip from WTTW's first new documentary series, Firsthand, Living in Poverty. This episode follows Gary Ladehoff of Zion as he seeks out new employment, looks for reliable transportation, and takes care of his young daughter.
It's literally paycheck to paycheck. You know, after rent, phone bill, diapers for my kid, wipes, the money just gets accounted for right away. I don't have a car right now, so I have to constantly get people to give me rides, fork over gas money.
Hold on, let me go grab this car seat real quick.
If I were to get a car, it would make my life so much easier. It's like a priority that I need right now. It's a necessity.
All right.
After work, my friend Malcolm and his girlfriend Emily picked me up to go pick up my daughter Mia from my friend Matt's house.
Peanut. Daddy.
I got a boo-boo, Daddy.
You got some boo-boo?
Yeah.
Where?
2 boo-boos.
2 boo-boos?
Yeah.
My daughter Mia Bella, she's 2.5 years old right now. She means everything to me. I don't think I would be where I'm at right now without her.
You play with the chickies?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Chickies and
See the chickies? No? You scared?
He's scared.
Good working, man. I'm gonna go to this dealership right now and go look at this car. Hopefully, I'm looking at a truck, man, because that way I can do like a bunch of extra like side work and stuff with it. It's getting expensive, like having to like pay people, man, like go back and forth with her and shit like that, and then I can get in somewhere paying more money. Yeah. So I mean, they're good people there, but it's not gonna cut it for a while, man. It's gonna be hard, really hard. All right, say goodbye to Uncle Matt. Give hugs. Hugs.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
It's till like the 31st, that promotion that they have right now. All these dealerships are hurting so bad, so they're just giving everybody cars, like anybody.
If you drive off the lot with one, then I know I will too.
All right, 28 what?
What? What?
Why?
Why? Because it's his. Why do you say why to everything? Well, why? Have kiss.
Die.
Okay. Watch your hands.
Turn right.
You heard her, right?
For real?
Yeah, go right.
In a quarter mile, turn right onto Kenosha Road.
Being in the Zion area, it's rough because there's not much out here. If you want to go out and find a job that's where you're gonna live comfortable, you're definitely gonna need transportation because you're gonna have to venture outside of Zion.
And now joining us with more are Maggie Morales, Executive Director of the Lake County Community Foundation, and Gary Ladehoff, who we just saw in that clip from Firsthand Living in Poverty. Thank you both for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, it's good to see you. And Gary, just a fascinating documentary, a fascinating series. Tell us how things have been going for you since you filmed that documentary.
I mean, things were going very well for a while. Just until recently, I split up with a girlfriend. We were living together, so unfortunately, I may be ending back up in the Zion area.
Back up in the... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, starting back over in the Zion area. So unfortunately, that's where kind of like my only option.
And why did you want to be involved in this project that we're doing, just looking at poverty in the Chicago area?
I mean, to kind of like put a story out there so people can see, you know, it's a lot of people, they kind of like turn their head and they don't see, you know, what it's like, you know. And also I went through like a lot of stuff, and maybe it could help somebody, you know, overcome like addiction and, you know, help them not become a product of their environment.
And Maggie Morales, you know, we tend to think of poverty as something that's a big problem in urban areas, in rural areas, but not so much the suburbs. And here we're focusing on the suburbs. Why that perception?
I definitely started drinking a lot.
I think, you know, it's a huge misconception that poverty is an urban issue and that it's predominantly impacting communities of color. And here in Lake County, we see poverty all throughout the community. And those in poverty here in Lake County, roughly 38% of them are individuals or Caucasian. So, you know, it's not concentrated in one particular area. And I think as Sochi shared earlier in the segment, you know, the suburbanization of poverty creates the very issues that Gary's experiencing on a daily basis with trying to secure employment and access proper transportation that's reliable to get him to and from work.
Well, and then let's look at another clip from our Firsthand series, Living in Poverty.
I had a really bad overdose here one time.
Did you really?
Yeah. Right before my daughter was born. It was, looking back at it now, like, I put myself through a lot, you know, just for something that is pointless.
It scares me so much, like, thinking that my daughter can very easily get wrapped up into that and just, like, throw her life away, and, like, that would break my heart. That's the one thing that really scares me about, like, falling, like, really hard.
So Gary, you just said you'd been through a lot of stuff. Hopefully that you can share that with other folks. You're talking there about addiction problems. What is the advice that you want to share to others perhaps going through this?
It's not easy at all. I mean, you gotta want it. I mean, I had so many people reach out and try to help me, and then I never got myself clean until I genuinely wanted to do it. Yeah, it's a battle. Like, the easy part is getting clean. It's just playing catch up from everything that you threw away. That's the hard part. But I mean, my advice is, just do it. Take any help that's being offered to you. There's people out there that will genuinely help you.
And Maggie, we were talking about Lake County suburbs. Lake County we think of as one of the most affluent counties in the country, but there's a huge disparity in that county.
Right.
Talk about that.
Yeah, so we're known as one of the wealthiest counties, the wealthiest county in the state of Illinois. But when you really start to drill down and look at the numbers, you can see that there's this tremendous disparity between the quality of life, just 5 miles apart from one municipality to another. And it affects everything. It affects people's life expectancy. So there's a 14-year difference in life expectancy between our richest community and one of our poorest communities, North Chicago. And that's the stuff that we're really working to address, because your zip code should not dictate your future.
Gary, what's that experience like for you, living in difficult conditions sometimes, but, so close by you see such affluence in certain communities?
Anyway, for the longest, like, I would be envious towards it. But it's something that I grew up in. So I guess it was something that I was used to. Like the same thing too with like addiction. A lot of people think that just targets like low income areas, but it doesn't discriminate. It goes everywhere.
Certainly, it knows no demographic or physical boundaries. Maggie, how has the pandemic affected some of the efforts to combat poverty in the suburbs specifically?
Yeah, so I think that the pandemic and just everything that's happening in the environment, politically and socially, has really amplified these issues and really demonstrated the huge disparity that lies within the communities that are wealthy and those that aren't, and that disproportionate investment. And so, it creates this divide when we need to be united. And so what we've been focusing on at the Community Foundation is really building a permanent crisis relief fund to respond to these needs. And in Lake County, the biggest needs that we're seeing are really access to food. Rent is another significant issue. Regular transportation to provide healthcare for appointments that are non-COVID related is even an issue. So it's really touching on a lot of the same things that Gary's stories highlighted. Our Community Foundation has really played a coordinating role in the county to help support local philanthropy and coordinate that investment so that we're really leveraging every dollar and maximizing that impact and partnership with the government.
It's certainly a lot of things exacerbating what you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. We have to leave it there. Our thanks to Maggie Morales and Gary Ladehoff. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
And up next, a look at Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy in Lawndale.
In January 1966, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., his wife Coretta, and their 4 children moved into a West Side tenement and set to work addressing a major facet in his lifelong battle against poverty: quality, affordable housing. Here's a story and conversation that first aired on yesterday's Chicago Tonight Black Voices. When Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. came to Lawndale 50 years ago this month, His mission was to bring an end to the discriminatory housing practices that forced many Black Chicagoans to live in terrible conditions.
We have looked forward to our coming to Chicago with great and eager anticipation.
Upon his arrival in Lawndale, King and 3 civil rights organizations seized this 3-flat on South Homan Avenue, where tenants were living with no heat, electricity, or hot water. King and the other building's tenants worked together to fix up the building, but King's vision for Chicago went far beyond fixing up dilapidated housing. In a 1967 speech, King said, quote, "If there is to be genuine equality, there must be a radical redistribution of economic and political power." 50 years later, the redistribution King hoped for has yet to reach Lawndale. Though the neighborhood was struggling with poverty when King lived here, 16th Street was still lined with shops and apartment buildings. Today, vacant lots dominate 16th Street, and affordable, quality housing is still in short supply. When he was assassinated in 1968, King was preparing to launch the Poor People's Campaign, his movement for economic justice. One of the pillars of that campaign reflected his work in Lawndale, the fight to secure fair housing, which he saw as crucial to enabling families to lift themselves out of poverty. Joining us to talk about how fair housing and poverty intersect are Walonda Cannon, Senior Director of Development for Breakthrough Urban Ministries, a faith-based nonprofit organization on Chicago's West Side, and Richard Townsell, Executive Director of Lawndale Christian Development Corporation. Welcome both of you to Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, and thanks for joining us. Walonda Cannon, let's start with you, please. How does affordable housing and housing assistance help people to achieve financial stability?
Well, I think that thank you for the question. I think that there are a couple of things, when it's not just about getting people housed and making sure that they are safe, right? It's also about giving them quality housing. When a person is housed, they're safe, they're able to live in a way that's honorable to them, then that impacts their employment, their ability to obtain and maintain employment, because they don't have to worry about where they're going to sleep, where they're going to prepare their food. That impacts their health, that impacts everything in their lives. And so housing, safe housing is one thing, but affordable housing is something totally different.
You mentioned one of them, but what are some of the positive ripple effects that come with having that kind of stable, affordable housing?
That's I have a very personal experience with this. There was a person that I know who was going to school and had employment, but she was couch surfing, which is she didn't make enough to live on her own, and so she had to live with one of her relatives. Well, the relatives could no longer allow her to sleep on their couch, and so she had to move her clothes into a storage bin and every day go to the storage, change her clothes, and then go to school and then go to her employer. Well, at that employer, that's where she would sleep or wash up or do things like that. When they found out that she was doing that, she lost her job. So this is how that impacts a person's life. It's not just about housing in the way that we think, but when you have a house, you don't have to worry about where you're going to take a shower. You don't have to figure out where you're going to sleep every night. That thing, that very simple thing that many of us take for granted, is something that's major. And it caused her to lose her job simply because she did not have a place to regularly rest every night.
Richard Townsell, your organization, Lawndale Christian Development Corporation, you all manage several mixed income housing developments, including the Dr. King Legacy Apartments, which I was just able to see this past week. And they stand on the site of the building where Dr. King lived. Can this model be replicated in other parts of the city?
Well, it has been replicated. There's been, robust work in communities like in Pilsen and on the South Side, with quiet communities. There's a bustling community development corporation movement in Chicago, and groups like, Bickerdike and others have been doing this for 50 years. And so it can be replicated. It has been replicated, and we've learned from others as well in the community development corporation field.
If then, it obviously can be replicated, it has been replicated, what more does city government need to do to help remedy the problem of affordable housing?
Well, I think the issue really starts at the federal level. I think HUD has not really given in the same way that Chicago goes after dollars for transportation every year, right? Our delegation does a great job of getting transportation dollars. They have to do the same thing around affordable housing. There is, short supply of it. For every person that wins an award with the Department of Housing to do a development like the Martin Luther King Apartments, there are probably 10 or 15 that didn't get it. And so we need resources to be able to do this work. In addition, one of the things that we're working on with the city is we have a 1,000 Homes campaign. So the shirt I'm wearing talks about the North Lawndale Homeowners Association. Our goal is to build 1,000 homes on the south side and on the west side for working families. And we're working with the city to realize that and start the first 250 homes in North Lawndale. Walanda has been key to helping us train and develop new homeowners that will own those homes. So the city can play its part. We got to play our part as well.
My thanks to Walanda Cannon and Richard Townsell for joining us. Again, that conversation first aired on Chicago Tonight Black Voices over the weekend. You can see an extended version on our website, and you can catch Chicago Tonight Black Voices on Sundays at 6 p.m. And we're back to wrap things up, but first to look at the weather. And that's our show for this Monday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7 and join WTTW in just a few minutes at 8 p.m. for a virtual event. Firsthand, Living in Poverty. We'll continue the conversation about this very important issue. Go to WTTW.com/poverty event and click on the Join Virtual Event link to access the screening and discussion.
And now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that's proud to serve its community through pro bono legal services.